The King and Queen of Sweden are in Ottawa for their third official visit to Canada.
Canada and Sweden are experiencing long momentum across areas such as defense, trade, science, climate, and energy.
That was King Carl Gustaf at Rideau Hall this morning, emphasizing the partnership between Canada and Sweden. The royal visit comes amid a battle over a fighter jet contract. Swedish defense firm Saab is looking for Canada to purchase its Gripen jets, promising to create thousands of jobs in Canada along with it. This comes after Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a review of its F-35 contract with U.S. firm Lockheed Martin, something Industry Minister Mélanie Joly was asked about this morning.
I don't believe that we've had enough jobs created and industrial benefits done out of the F-35 contract. I think it's not enough. When it comes to the Gripen, of course, we're really interested in seeing what can be done because there was an unsolicited bid that came up. 10,000 jobs is indeed a very interesting offer. So we have to look at what our military capabilities need, and at the same time, what are the number of jobs created across the country.
Philippe Lagassé is an associate professor of international affairs at Carleton University, and he joins me now. Professor, it's good to see you again, sir.
Thank you.
There's a heavy campaign from Saab and seemingly the government of Sweden and maybe even the royal family try to get Canada to purchase their Gripen fighter jet. There's thousands of jobs on the table. I mean, what do you make of this push, this fight to try to get Canada to buy this plane?
Well, David, all countries aim to export their defense goods. Canada does. We'll be doing it far more if the government's defense industrial strategy is anything to go by. So I'm not at all surprised that the Swedes would be trying to export the Gripen. They were one of two competitors in Canada's recent future fighter capability project competition, and therefore they're trying to have another go at it.
They've put a lot of jobs on the table. They say they're looking for not just customers, but also partners, because they can't quite scale up to do the production they need to do in Sweden itself. And we heard from the industry minister, Mélanie Joly, today that she doesn't think the industrial benefits from the F-35 have been robust enough. When you're making a decision like the government is on stick with the F-35s or hybrid, make it a hybrid fleet by buying these planes, how do you balance all of these things?
It's an incredibly difficult decision to make. When the Prime Minister, for instance, was asked whether or not Canada would buy two different types of submarines, he just ruled it out entirely, saying that it's simply too expensive to maintain two variants of that type of capability. And defenders of the F-35 purchase will say, look, the same calculus should apply to fighter jets. You're trying to maintain two different sets of infrastructure, train two different sets of pilots, maintain as well different munitions in some cases, different intelligence reprogramming labs, and all these types of things. So it's an incredible investment. It can be difficult for a small military to get enough people and enough investment to do it. On the other hand, we certainly wouldn't be the only country to have a mixed fleet of fighters, and many of our European allies do that. So it's certainly not beyond the realm of the possible. The question is just whether or not we want to spend the money to do it.
Right. Well, the concerns you've outlined, those are spelled out in this letter that a dozen former high-ranking officers at the Royal Canadian Air Force sent, warning against this, saying that the F-35 is really the best option. And I wonder, though, Professor, that the enticement to hybridize the fleet essentially is, well, less reliance on the United States, but it's the industrial benefit potential that's there. But you hear complaints from people in the military and in the procurement field that it's the focus on the industrial benefits that slows this down and stops the military from having what it needs. I mean, are we at one of those potential hinge points when it comes to the fighters?
I think it really depends on what kind of decision the government makes. Were it to move ahead with 88 F-35s as we originally planned, but then supplemented that F-35 fleet with some Gripens or perhaps a sixth generation aircraft, then that wouldn't be a fair charge. However, the industry minister has also raised concerns that, in her view, the Lockheed deal doesn't include sufficient industrial benefits for Canada. That's been a concern that the Canadian government has had around the nature of the F-35 consortium for some time. So it's a fair critique to say that we do view industrial benefits as a key part of our defense procurement considerations. I think it's going to become even more prominent based on what the government has said, trying to say that increasingly they will be asking the Canadian Armed Forces to buy Canadian and to really work with Canadian industry. So this is just, I would argue, the first of many salvos and many tensions that we're likely to see as the government tries to use defense policy as a form of industrial policy, and the Canadian Armed Forces try to stick to what they see as the technical requirements being the most important piece of this equation.
Right. So if they were to go with the Saab deal, to do the shorthand on it, and get sort of the industrial capacity and the production line in Canada, it starts laying the groundwork for that Canadian defense policy, industrial policy that they've been talking about. But then unless that's in addition to the F-35s, you risk limiting your interoperability with the U.S. and just having the kit you need to run a modern military. Am I understanding it correctly?
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think the key thing to recognize is that we're talking about a mixed fleet in all likelihood here, not a cancellation of the F-35 program for Canada, simply because we've, sorry for the bad pun, but run out of runway when it comes to the F-18 fleet. It's simply at the end of its life. It has to be replaced. And right now we do have an order for a replacement fleet that we're already training on and getting ready for. So the question really then becomes how many F-35s, what's sufficient to fulfill our NORAD obligations, what's sufficient for us to undertake expeditionary operations if we so desire alongside the United States in a high threat environment. That would be the kind of context where an F-35 would be the ideal platform for the Canadian Armed Forces. But that doesn't necessarily preclude the government from striking a deal with Saab to build Gripens to undertake other roles, whether in the air defense of Canada or the defense of Europe or many other things. I think there's a lot of details to be ironed out here. And I just wish that we could almost tone down the conversation and look at, all right, nobody's saying that the F-35 is a bad plane or that Canada shouldn't buy it. Nobody's saying that the Gripen is a bad plane. It's just the government has to make decisions around how it's balancing what it sees as our defense requirements, our industrial requirements, and how to build partnerships.
Yeah, look, there's pros and cons to each choice, right? If you just look at it in a neutral, objective, and technical way. But then you layer over the changing geopolitics of it. With the F-35, so much of it depends on, I'm going to say, the tacit approval of the U.S. in some way, because the data and various things that it is U.S. military hardware at the end of the day, and things are changing in our relationship with that country. There is a world, maybe, Professor, where we have to do operations with European countries without the U.S. And, having that European plane could be the sort of thing you need for, I don't know, security missions in Europe or expeditionary missions involving European partners, right? So how do you balance those geopolitical challenges that are emerging in our relationship with the U.S. in a purchase decision like this?
That's right, David. And I think part of the argument for those saying a mixed fleet is the way to go is to build in some strategic autonomy, as you're pointing to be able to do things on our own without having to worry about access to intelligence data, reprogramming data for the fighter capability, potentially being able to undertake operations with European allies, again, more independently, while at the same time recognizing that you still want to, and will always have in Canada, a fairly close continental defense relationship with the United States, just by the nature of the continent and the nature of the threat. And interestingly enough, as your listeners will recall, the Prime Minister has also indicated that Canada is interested in joining the Golden Dome.
Right.
So it's not as if we're cutting out this relationship, but it's a question of redundancies and options. And perhaps the government is willing to pay a lot more money, and Canadians have to be aware of that, a lot more money to have either more choice or greater autonomy.
And just as a final point, any sense of where you think this lands? I don't know if Mark Carney's called you up and said, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think the decision is Canada might make here at the end of the day?
I think it's a very difficult one, David. I think if I were advising the Prime Minister on this, I would probably say, look, move ahead with the F-35 buy. I think that's important for the nature of our relationship with the United States. I think it's important for our own defense industry, which is tied into that platform, and it does give us options. If the government really wants to build out the aerospace capability here in Canada and is committed to building partners in Europe, then maybe spending more on a separate fleet is a way to go. And I simply think that we should view this in all the different considerations that the government's looking at, and not narrowly focus either only on the combat capabilities of the aircraft or interoperability with the United States. There are other larger considerations, such as strategic autonomy, such as industrial policy, which have to be brought into this equation.
Philippe Lagassé, Associate Professor of International Affairs, and a guy we call when things get complicated. We appreciate you taking our call today, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.